Hello and welcome to this Thursday's morning market briefing. We've got lots to talk about, but firstly, Donald Trump ally Mike Johnson is elected now as US Speaker of the House of Representatives. And this is obviously coming after weeks of gridlock, as well as that UN agency in Gaza says it will be out of fuel. It will run out of fuel within Gaza within hours, 48 hours being the latest, but we'll come to that. But lots to talk about on the charts also, and lots happening on the economic calendar as well. So before we get straight into it though, make sure to subscribe, and yeah, let's get straight into it. So the first article to talk about, of course, is Mike Johnson. Now, Mike Johnson, a loyal ally of Donald Trump, has been elected as Speaker of the House of Representatives, and this is coming following weeks of congressional paralysis in which, very little came to avail in the ways of electing a speaker. Now, this is a topic that we've been talking about a lot, largely in play due to the fact that it, affects US markets a lot, as well as, affecting, gold as well as a safe haven asset, as if they're unable to elect a US House Speaker, this prevents the US from being able to pass policy, damages the US's reputation, can damage the economy as a result through lack of ability for policy to respond to economic issues and that sort of thing. And with this, we also had, the very differing kind of candidates to become US House Speaker, with, certain US House Speaker candidates being far more hardline Republican based, and then some being more moderate based. And it's only until yesterday when we finally seen some Republican, with the ability to unite the House. And this is kind of surprising due to the fact that Mike Johnson is such a strong ally of Donald Trump, and one of those hardline Republicans like Jim Jordan, which failed to become elected 3 times over. Now, this electoral result does signal a sharp tack to the right for Republicans in the House of Representatives. After all, he is a strong ally of Trump, and holds many of those more hardline populist Republican beliefs, and follows and shares that MAGA ideology. Now, 220 Republicans did vote for Johnson on Wednesday, with no Democrat supporting the vote. Now, you could argue now that this was a poor decision by the Democrats to not support a Republican moderate whilst they were running, and so ensuring that a moderate Republican was at least as US House Speaker, rather than the more hardline Mike Johnson, for example, or Jim Jordan that we had running before. But seemingly, they wanted to hold their partisan line, and as a result, what we've now seen is a hardline Republican become elected for Speaker. Now, this result is obviously a show of unity within the party, which has struggled to find a candidate following Kevin McCarthy's ousting, which obviously, is something that we've spoken about a lot now, with Matt Gaetz, the really popular kind of Florida congressman, a strong ally of Trump, a hardline Republican, and he led the kind of Republican rebels, the 8 of them, to ousting Kevin McCarthy, who was presenting more signs of being a more moderate Republican, especially with his kind of approach to dealing with, issues within the House of Representatives and finding a pragmatic solution, and many of those hardline Republicans found issues with him, going over to the other side of the House of Representatives and trying to create some policy agendas which can pass through both kind of parties, and both parties be somewhat happy with the last 3 weeks exposing sharp ideological divisions within the party. And this is really between the more moderate Republicans, which generally have been supporting, same-sex marriage, greater liberal, more liberal ideology, I guess, but also on the foreign policy side, this has been a clear kind of partisan split within the party itself, is around this increased funding to Ukraine, as well as, funding to Israel. So, two active conflict zones, and the funding between those two nations has been very, conflicting within the party, with more of the hardline Republicans being really against this kind of motion to fund and help support these nations in need. Most of the more moderate Republicans obviously want to help these kind of nations, similar to the other more moderate Democrats as well, which is kind of, the centrist view at the moment. Now, legislation paralysis did result in Congress not being able to pass new proposals for billions of dollars in aid to both Israel and Ukraine. And this is what we were talking about last week, is, the issue around the fact that after Israel was invaded by Hamas and massacred, many of its civilians massacred, Israel wasn't able, the US wasn't able to quickly pass a kind of piece of legislation to make sure Israel got their funding for what they might need when trying to, take on the Hamas terrorists now. And so this kind of lack of ability to create policy did create these issues within foreign policy, as, with Israel not being able to receive the kind of money and the weapons that they might need and the equipment. As we know, many of the reservists within the IDF were without, bulletproof helmets and body armor, and with as for Ukraine, obviously Ukraine's front is stagnating more and more. However, the issue of Ukraine losing its support and as a result losing its territory is very, very real, with the active support by the US of missiles and other sorts of weaponry, but largely these bit larger weapons, more expensive weapons which are manufactured in the US or Western European nations, is what Ukraine really needs. And so ending that kind of and not being able to increase or make sure that aid is going through to Ukraine obviously hampers Ukraine's ability to make any gains or defend its territory. Now, Johnson's first task, however, will be to confront the looming government shutdown, where a federal budget must be agreed upon by mid-November to avoid a shutdown. And this is something that we covered, at the very, we've been covering this since the start, really, with Kevin McCarthy only passing a temporary kind of federal budget to keep them going for like 45 days, I believe, all the way up until mid-November. However, obviously that will, end in mid-November, and therefore a federal budget will need to be agreed upon. And if that does not take place, obviously we risk seeing a government shutdown. And now we're seeing, a more hardline Republican be elected to the House Speaker role. This obviously causes more worries around that kind of issue of never being able to pass a federal budget, as it's likely now that Mike Johnson will take a hard line on only, funding, very little to the federal departments, in line with the hardline Republican message. So it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. Now, Mike Johnson is now the fourth Republican Speaker nominee following McCarthy's ousting, with Stephen Scalise, Jim Jordan and Tom Emmer failing to gain enough support, with Johnson being now a evangelical Christian, hardline social conservative, being against abortion and also against same-sex marriage and against heterosexual, divorces in many cases. Obviously, he's not able to legislate on that, but putting as many restrictions in to make it harder to divorce is one of his kind of, clear values and ideologies. With Johnson earlier this year voting against more US aid to Ukraine, with him also being a vocal voice on the side of Trump's claims of election fraud in 2020, with Johnson voting against certifying Joe Biden's electoral college victory. So this is obviously, some very hardline Republican rhetoric, and obviously it kind of risks the ability to work with the Democrats on a more pragmatic front, as the Republicans only hold a slight and marginal majority within the House of Representatives. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, of course. But next to talk about, of course, is the UN agency in Gaza, with the main UN agency bringing in humanitarian aid to Gaza saying it will run out of fuel in less than a day. And this comes as agencies attempt to help roughly 1 million people displaced by the war in Gaza, with the relief agency saying it needs to run its vehicles which would pick up aid. Now this is, a topic that we've been talking about a lot recently and covered since the start of Hamas's attacks on Israel. And obviously Hamas's attacks on the 7th of October caused over 1,400 civilians to be massacred, as well as the IDF soldiers, as well as more civilians being taken hostage and pulled back into Gaza. And the response that was then seen by the IDF was a strong and heavy bombardment, aerial bombardment. And so now we're kind of seeing this issue of now civilian casualties mounting on the Gazan side, with many Palestinian civilian deaths as a result of Hamas's military infrastructure being embedded within Gaza. So definitely keep your eyes on that. And in response, Israeli officials responded to what the UN were saying, accusing Hamas of hoarding fuel in depots in Gaza. With Israel's siege of Gaza continuing every day, UN officials have warned of a humanitarian crisis, with the lack of water and electricity being dire. As we do know, Israel has cut off its oil, its kind of fuel and water supply, as well as electricity supply to Gaza, in an effort to kind of root out Hamas from their underground tunnels and military infrastructure networks. And in preparations for their invasion into Gaza, Israel wants to weaken Hamas in any way they can, especially by reducing their kind of assets, those being assets using fuel and electricity as well. And this is really the effort that's being made by Israel. Now this comes as Israel continues their bombardment of Gaza, and the ground offensive prepares, with Netanyahu in a televised address yesterday saying Israel was preparing for a ground incursion. So Israel is still ready to go. I know this is something we've been talking about since the very start of the conflict, but it does seem now that there is this kind of unified idea and date at which Israel will enter Gaza. And Tuesday's comments by the UN Secretary General, which we spoke about yesterday, triggered great commotion between Israel and UN officials after Guterres commented on the terrorist attack by Hamas by saying that the attack didn't take place in a vacuum, but a suffering occupation. So more so taking the Palestinian side and almost somewhat justifying what kind of took place, which angered many Israeli officials, as they saw this as a justification rather than an explanation for the context of the issues within Gaza. Now, Gaza's Hamas-controlled health ministry said the lack of power due to the outage of Gaza's sole power plant forced hospitals to use generators, but fuel for such generators should run out within the next 48 hours. And obviously this is worrying news for the world, really, is the issue especially of civilians being hurt in the process of trying to root out these terrorists which obviously run Gaza. So it's a very difficult situation to try and solve, as obviously no one wants to see civilians within Gaza dying on their hospital beds because they aren't able to get the electricity that they need to run the facilities that they require. With Israel responding by noting Hamas has more than enough fuel for hospitals, and the blockade of fuel into Gaza is to damage Hamas's military capabilities and tunnel networks. After all, Hamas does have a massive tunnel network underneath the entirety of the Gaza Strip, really. where much of his military infrastructure is embedded. Within these tunnels, there's oxygen tanks, electricity, electricity powering lighting running along, the roofs of the tunnels within Gaza. And, this is kind of Israel's attempt to prevent them from being able to light up those tunnels, being able to, power the generators down in the tunnels to fuel their kind of their defense of Gaza. And, Israel is noting the fact that, Hamas does have, access to large fuel depots, which, Israel posted on Twitter, posted on X, formerly known as Twitter, aerial images of the liters and liters of fuel, which, Hamas has still, not released to any civilians, but is just holding for themselves, it does seem. But, many of these claims aren't being verified yet by major news publishers, major publications, so we'll wait on that to say any more. But next to talk about, of course, is the charts, with some stuff happening but not so much happening on the US side, with US indices first to talk about, which have seemingly consolidated. So we did talk about how yesterday US indices were kind of pushing back up, but kind of consolidating, not really doing much. But we were interested to see whether price can move all the way up until the 38.2% Fibonacci area. Did not reach that area, instead it turned and has now kind of consolidated around this area. So it'd be interesting to see how US indices shape up as they begin to consolidate once again. Next to talk about, though, is the dollar. Now, yesterday we spoke about how the dollar had broken above this area of liquidity, where we expected some resistance, with this high level of liquidity being stimulated with buy side as a result of manufacturing and services data within the US. We saw this surge in price. It came to this trend line and has now broken above the trend line, which we saw as significant. We said, it was likely that there was going to be some strong area of resistance. We did see a bearish reaction from that trend line, but seemingly, the dollar has greater momentum to the upside. It broke above it, almost retested this trend line, you could say, and is now on the upward trajectory. So it'd be interesting to see whether, the dollar will now continue and break above these prior highs. Now it's above this trend line, or in fact it may make another double top, as these two areas are quite near, so it's likely that there's some area of resistance around this area as well. So that's definitely something to note. So definitely keep your eyes on that as the dollar shapes up. But next to talk about is Euro USD. Not too much to talk about on Euro USD, but simply because we've had dollar strength today, we've seen Euro kind of decline, breaking below this area of liquidity, which saw some buying side momentum after it spiked down into that area. That said, we do have major ECB news coming out today, which we'll talk about on the economic calendar at the very end. But yet we do have very important ECB news coming out today, which will heavily move Euro USD. So definitely keep your eyes on that if you're trading Euro USD. But next to talk about is USD JPY. Sorry. Now USD JPY has broken above these prior highs and is now seemingly pushing further into this area of resistance that we've noted as a really strong area of sell orders, as it did form a cup and handle, really trying to break above this area of resistance that we had noted, but just due to the fact that there's so many sell orders within this area, obviously we weren't able to see enough momentum to the upside. It did spike to the downside, likely gaining more liquidity before being able to take a further move to the upside. And now we're seeing that momentum kind of come through on USD JPY, so we could now be expecting actually a move where we would break above these prior highs on USD JPY. So definitely keep your eyes on that. Next to talk about, though, is Bitcoin, which spiked like crazy yesterday, as we spoke about, but sorry, I'll delete this. Spiked like crazy yesterday following increased speculation that Bitcoin ETFs will be approved by the SEC. That said, following yesterday's movements, we have sort of stagnated. We haven't broken above those prior highs made on Tuesday. So definitely keep your eyes out on Bitcoin to see whether we will retrace. Obviously, it's hard to tell, highly volatile, but definitely keep your eyes on that, as we do have the potential for a retracement or another extremely strong push to the upside. But next to talk about is gold. Now, gold is also kind of consolidating, forming an interesting position on the charts. I believe we have Jerome Powell's speech later this week. I could be wrong, but if we do, that's. Oh wait, I think we actually have it. Yeah, no, we might have it tomorrow. I'm not sure. We may have had it yesterday. I don't know. I'm sorry, but it does seem that gold is consolidating, possibly on the front of not too much escalation taking place in Gaza, but the result within the House of Representatives vote could be considered as positive, as now at least there's a speaker. But that said, it's unlikely that a budget is actually now passed, due to the fact that there is such a hardline Republican within the House of Representatives speaker position, and therefore it may take too hardline of a position policy wise and budget wise for the rest of the party to support, especially the moderate side. So that's why we've kind of seen this stagnation in gold as it tries to figure out what kind of the geopolitical developments might be, as well as the political developments within the US as well. So definitely keep your eyes on that. Lastly, to talk about though on the charts is oil, which saw a strong bullish push yesterday. Coming down, as we spoke about yesterday, coming down all the way to this 78.6% Fibonacci area, finding its liquidity there, and now pushing with great momentum to the upside. It has broken below this trend line, which we did note as possible bearish signals for oil, but with this strong bullish momentum now, it'll be questionable to see whether this bearish reversal will actually hold its weight, and oil won't just continue higher following this gain of liquidity. So definitely keep your eyes on oil as well. But lastly, to talk about, of course, is the economic calendar, with some data coming out for today for sure. With firstly, the first bit of data and news coming out today being the ECB's meeting and interest rate which will obviously be highly influential into the way Euro USD will move, even the dollar as well, as obviously even the dollar will be influenced by hot money flows within other nations. So definitely keep your eyes on the ECB's interest rate decision. We also have Canadian average weekly earnings that obviously plays into inflation expectations. As well as that, we have US durable good orders, as well as US GDP growth rate. So some US data coming out today for sure, along with US continuing jobless claims, so some unemployment kind of focused data. And finally, we have the ECB's press conference, which is obviously following the interest rate decision, which will kind of be very important, as it will allow us to kind of understand the decision a lot more, and also understand, the ECB's view on the future of the European kind of the economies, the EU economies, as well as EU interest rates. As well as that, we have, of course, the ECB's president Lagarde's speech. So lots to look out for today. We've covered a lot on the articles, a lot on the charts, and a lot now on the economic calendar. Hope you have a great trading day, but that's all from us at Wildwood Capital. Have a great one. See you later. Bye.